Take my lips and speak through them. Take our ears and hear through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for thee. May I speak in the name of the living God. Amen. Amen. Mark Twain once said, "It's not those parts of the Bible that I can't understand that bother me. It's the parts I do understand." That's how I feel about today's gospel. It's not that I don't understand what Jesus wants me to do. It's that it's so appallingly clear. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. What? Love, do good to, bless, and pray for our enemies who hate, curse, and abuse us? Why on earth would we want to do that? Loving enemies would seem to, require somehow forgiving them and letting go of vengeance and revenge, which is incredibly difficult when you consider that, as a group, we kind of lean more toward retaliatory justice. Judging by the no less than 22 Avenger movies, seen by 183 millions of us. Avengers, that's what most of us want to be, to avenge, to inflict harm in return for an injury or wrong done to oneself or another. Love your enemies? Gosh, heck, it's hard enough to love our families. Which leads me to the Old Testament lesson this morning. Talk about dysfunctional. Genesis chapter 45 is the climax of the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors, as it was called in the Arch Bible book series we had as kids. Absolutely fantastic story made into a musical, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor dream coat. You'll remember Joseph was the 11th of Jacob's 12 sons, the son of his old age, the first child of his favorite wife. Jacob loved Joseph best of all and gave him a multicolored coat to prove it, which weirdly did not endear him to his siblings. It did not help matters that Joseph was a dreamer who didn't hesitate to tell his brothers on more than one occasion, "Hey, last night I had a dream about us. You guys were all bowing down to me, like stars to the sun." Even his dad wasn't amused by that. The brothers decide to get rid of this dreamer, and they threw him into an empty well. Some traders happened by, and they thought, well, this would be a great way to get rid of him without actually having to kill him. So they sold him to the traders, who then sold him into slavery in Egypt. The brothers put goat's blood on his coat of many colors and brought it back to his father, who, believing he was dead, was devastated. Joseph, meanwhile, was going through a roller coaster of ups and downs in Egypt. He rose to be the highest slave in his master's household, to being falsely imprisoned when his master's wife made a play for him that he rebuffed. Then he rose to be in charge of the other prisoners, but languished all the same 2 years in prison, until Pharaoh, awakened by troubling dreams, learned that Joseph is skilled in their interpretation, and he sends for him and discovers that 7 years of famine are on the way. Pharaoh hires Joseph to help him prepare, and together they save Egypt from starvation. End of the day, Joseph is second in command in Egypt, becoming even a father to Pharaoh, as Joseph relates in the lesson this morning. Meanwhile, back in the land of Israel, the famine has caused Joseph's dad, Jacob, to send his remaining sons to Egypt in search of grain. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. He's dressed like an Egyptian, speaking a foreign language. Long story short, after making them endure some trials and testing that he just can't resist, and you gotta understand, Joseph tells his brother that he is their brother Joseph, whom they sold into slavery all those years ago. The brothers are stunned. They never thought to see him again, feared he was dead, maybe even hoped that he was, out of fear of what he'd do to them if they ever ran across each other. And here he was. They're shocked, stunned, stricken. They are overwhelmed and amazed and waiting for the axe to fall. But it doesn't. Instead of using his power and position to get back at them, he reassures them. He seems intent on moving forward, on explaining to them that he's moved past it, that God has moved him past it. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, says Joseph. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Joseph sees God's hand at work in what's happened to him, making meaning out of what has happened to him, and it frees him from retribution and regret. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, to keep alive for you many survivors, says Joseph. This is independent of you and what you did. God had plans for my life, and I'm living them out because I'm here. Now, none of this works immediately on the brothers because they just can't take it in. They can't process what's happening. They don't know how to trust what Joseph is telling them. He's moved toward them, but they haven't yet moved toward him. Reconciliation, despite what they showed in the movies, is not a moment. Reconciliation is a process. It's a journey, not a moment. Full reconciliation doesn't take place until later in the story, actually. We don't witness it today. What we witness is that Joseph's dreams have come true. Not only do his brothers bow to him, but all of Egypt bows to him. His gift of administration makes Egypt the breadbasket of the world in a time of famine. God has used Joseph not only to bless Egypt and the surrounding nations, but also his troubled family. And by the end of this story, father, sons, and brothers, once divided by jealousy and envy, are reunited. It is a message of hope to those of us who have our own dysfunctional families. That God is always at work, no matter what, intent on making a way out of no way. Reconciliation is possible even in the worst situations. It's possible here because Joseph decides to make it possible. Instead of avenging himself, Joseph decides to love his enemies, as Jesus calls us to do in the gospel. Love, as it's used here, by the way, is an act of will. It's not warm fuzzies. It's an act of will. Joseph decides to do good to those who hate him. He has decided to bless those who cursed him and to pray for those who abused him. He refuses to let his brothers determine who he is. He refuses to let their actions determine his actions. He refuses to get locked in an endless, enraging cycle of retaliation and revenge. Notice he does not do this by pretending that the past never happened. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, as if one could. No, in fact, and as Archbishop Tutu teaches, reconciliation requires the truth. No matter how difficult or painful it may be, or the unacknowledged truth becomes a barrier instead of a bridge between us. Joseph states plainly that he has been wronged by them, but he doesn't dwell on it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. He's saying, I am more focused on what God has made out of my suffering than that you have caused it. I've got my eyes on the hand of God. God's got a purpose for me, for my life, to preserve life. This famine is going to last for 5 more years. And the only way through this dangerous present, not to mention the future, is by first facing the past. You must go back to our Father and tell him the truth. And then bring him back here with your wives and your children and your flocks and your herds, and I will provide for you. That is my part. And his brothers do their part by honoring his request, facing their father and their mistreatment of their brother, and then returning with their whole families to Joseph in Egypt. They are reconciled, and life is literally able to go on. Saints, bad things happen to us. Hard things, unjust, unfair things. We are wronged. And we wrong others. We can let it stop us, or we can find a way forward. We can focus on other people, or we can focus on God. And that's really the choice. We can focus on other people, or we can focus on God. God forgives. God doesn't avenge. Forgiveness is God's superpower. A superpower that can keep the past from becoming the future. That can make the future new. In a world that is locked in a cycle of pain and division and revenge, reconciliation is the only way out. It's the only way out of the hamster cage. God's hand is at work. Does God's hand at work justify the suffering that we endure? I don't know. I can't answer that. That is, as they say, way above my pay grade. But when I look at my life, I think I see a hand. When you look at your life, what do you see? Love is the only